So I'm gonna give this until about 6:35 before I'll do introductions and things. We'll just wait and see who else is gonna join. So everybody hang tight.
Yeah, that sounds good. I'm sure you'll be a little bit stuff. Cool.
Luke, do you know any good fungi stand-up jokes that you could just pass the time?
Oh geez, I already dropped a bunch of them this week, and there was a video that I was featured in through the Ashokan Center, and then I like dropped some jokes, and I didn't know if I was on camera when I dropped them, and then they appeared in the movie, and I was like, oh no, that's book. I was kicking myself. I mean, I could drop some, but everybody's probably heard of them. I got some video though. We could watch some funny stuff. Let's see. I could share. Let me look and see if I can find it. Some stinkhorns. Yeah, let's see. Okay. One moment. Oh, I'm still a participant. I can't share my screen, Madeline.
Let me fix that for you.
Thank you.
Of course.
Luke, who's this group?
Go ahead.
Who is this group? Madeline can tell you a little bit. It's Town of Rochester Environmental Conservation Commission.
Nice.
We are the Town Conservation Advisory Board. And every third Thursday, we host a local expert in some topic that's relevant to our local area. And knows something specific about the Shawangunk region and the Catskill region. And we had Luke back in November, and it was basically standing room only. So the hope was that he was going to be able to do
The room wasn't that big, though.
I believe
Nobody has
it.
to know.
What'd you say?
Nobody has to know how small the room was.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
But we were hoping that he was going to be able to host a walk and lead us around and show us, put this information to good use out in the wild. But due to the current coronavirus crisis, we're all stuck on Zoom now. So stay tuned for once we're all allowed to gather in nature together again.
Sure. Excellent.
Yeah. I'm going to wait just another minute just to make sure there's nobody else coming, or if anybody's going to come, they can join us, they will. What are we looking at, Luke?
Okay, we are looking at, this is a specific type of fungus that it's in the grouping called stinkhorn. And these fungi start as an egg shape, as you can see here. And then they break through that outer egg casing and they start to expand and grow out. And they have all different shapes, but the one specific characteristic, which is this spore dispersal method. And in this one, as you see it expand, you'll see there's an interior chamber inside of there. If you can see those little green spots, the spores actually form in this slimy green substance on the inside there, and it's super stinky. And that attracts all different types of insects and things like that. And then they step in this goo and they carry the spores away and land somewhere and disperse the spores for the fungus. Pretty interesting. They all make different smells. Some of them are super stinky, some of them not so much. Some of them are almost kind of pleasant in certain ways to certain people. But yeah, pretty interesting. This is a really cool one.
Life finds a way.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed. And now it's starting to break back down again.
We had these.
I found that just yesterday, so I figured I'd share.
I remember these awful smelling stinkhorns. They came out when I worked on Randall's Island. I think they were dog
stinkhorn. Yeah.
And they
so
were
I actually
weird.
have a photo of that. It says my screen sharing is paused. Let's see here.
Your screen sharing is paused. Do I need to
I don't know
unpause
what
it?
that means. Resume share. No, 1 second. Why is mine? I'm not seeing everybody else for some reason now. Oh, it's probably because I have share. Because I have sharing
yeah,
on, probably.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
Fine.
realize what I look like.
Are you able to pull up your presentation?
Yeah, I think so. Can you can
Okay.
see my screen?
Yeah, I can still see your Stinkhorn time-lapse video. So,
Oh, really?
yeah. Okay, now I can see it. Yes, there's your presentation.
Great. So now you can
Okay,
see
well,
me,
while
but
you're
no
setting
screen, right?
that up, no screen, just you.
Okie dokie.
While you set that up, welcome everybody to our first Zoom Third Thursday Nature Series presentation. My name's Madeline. I'm the chair of the Town of Rochester Environmental Conservation Commission. We host a monthly speaker series with local experts, and Luke is our local mycologist, Luke Sarrantonio. He's presented before, and I can promise you that this is going to be riveting and entertaining and highly educational.
Don't talk it up too much.
Luke's going to be, he's going to be showing his presentation on the side screen. If all of you, if anybody here is new to Zoom or less comfortable with it, along the bottom of the window, there's an opportunity to open up the chat option. If you have questions for Luke along the way, you can type in those questions to there, and you'll either answer them as he goes or at the end, depending on what kind of flow he's got. And yeah, go ahead, Luke. I'm going to go ahead and mute everybody
Cool.
so that you aren't interrupted.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Hey, everybody. It's kind of funny to be talking to a computer. I can see some people's faces, but not everybody's. A lot of people are just blank screens, but that's okay, I guess. Oh, something I just got in the mail that I'm very excited about. There's this woman in England that has been making these beautiful stickers. Bitter button mushrooms is her her Instagram tag, but yeah, I just got these in the mail. Super pretty stickers. Just wanted to highlight those real quick. Got this. Actually, you can't really see them very well. Well, maybe I'll show at the end. We can get better. Anyway, I'm going to pull up my presentation here and we can start up. Okay. Just need to share my screen. And okay. Can everybody see that? Cool.
All good.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So just a little bit of a background on myself. I grew up in Rosendale, New York, in this really small town in this beautiful area in the Hudson Valley. And I spent a lot of my time growing up in the local landscape, exploring a lot of the local forests and mountains and lakes and just everything that is so interesting to me. And then when I was in college, I studied forest biology at environmental science and forestry. And there I really, my eyes were open to the world of fungi and just how amazing they were. I studied under a couple different professors there. A man named Dr. Alexander Weir, that really inspired me. He was studying some really obscure fungi that I can talk about at some point. But let's start up with this presentation. So a lot of people are using this term these days in the mushroom and mycology community. So mycology is the study of fungi. Myco meaning mushrooms, and ology, the study of. So I consider myself an amateur mycologist. I'm just very fascinated by fungi and I study them in all different ways. But in the mushroom community, it's not coined by me, this term mush love, kind of as a parting, as a, you know, kind of use of this word. Anyway, let's do it. So we're going to go way back. We're going to start with some really, really early fossils. This is a fossil that was actually found in Canada, and it dates back. This is the earliest fossil that has any signs of these compound called chitin. And chitin is found in a lot of different organisms now in the world that we live in today, in arthropod beaks, in the exoskeletons of insects and things like that. But this one was found and found in Canada, dated to about 1 billion years ago. It's that around that time, about 1.3 billion years ago, that plants were or plant life. At that point, they called it like scum. It was early algae stages, and there's evidence that fungi and plants kind of came onto land around the same time. A lot of evidence that points to that is that at that time, much of the land was mostly rock. There was very little to no organic matter, and there was very little nutrients, or no nutrients really, for the plants to utilize. And fungi are pretty amazing at that. They can break down these rocks, releasing these different types of compounds. They release different enzymes that can actually break the rock down into base nutrients that these plants could then pull up and photosynthesize from air, pulling in all this carbon dioxide, turning it into sugars, and then sharing that possibly with the fungi. So there's speculation that these early fungi and plants were kind of partnering together to help each other come onto land and utilize this brand new resource coming from the oceans or from the water onto land. Then we're going to fast forward a little bit to about 420 million years ago. This is a Middle East. It's an organism that they dubbed Prototaxites, and Prototaxites was an organism that lived on the land. They believe that maybe it stood up like this. You can see on the side here, the artist rendition. But they believe it stood up, and at that time, the land plants were only about 1 meter tall, about 3 feet. Prototaxites was about 9 to 12 feet tall. So really massive, towering over those land plants possibly at that time. They think it was fungal. There is some speculation that maybe it was some type of a liverwort, which is like an early primitive type of plant that we see today. And they think that maybe it was some kind of partnership between fungi and plants at this early stage. Pretty amazing, mind-blowing fossils that they found. And we're going to keep on going through history. We're going to start out by doing this kind of historical background of fungi, and then we're going to get into some of the more gritty stuff. But this is a fossil that was found in Brazil just around the time that the supercontinent was breaking up, about 115 million years ago. And it's the first fossil that or the oldest fossil that they found that actually shows structures of a mushroom. And they think that maybe this fell into a river and then was covered up super quickly, because mushrooms are very fleshy. So it's not as often or very common that you'll find these fungal records in the fossil record. But as we go on, you can find records of fungi in amber. You can see we have a 1,000,000-year-old or 100-million-year-old fossil found in Burma. And then a 25-million-year-old fossil, encased in amber, not a fossil, fungus encased in amber. So there's a lot of history of fungi in the fossil record in amber. Here's just a quick kind of timeline of different fungal finds throughout the world. But this is called a cladogram. A cladogram basically shows different ways that organisms are related. And so, as you can see, we have the most common ancestor all the way down at the bottom, and then as it branches out through time, we see these different organism groupings branching out. And as you can see up in the top right, animals and fungi branch off. And you can see down below that plants are actually coming off much earlier. We actually share about 50% of our DNA with fungi, and So because of that, a lot of different compounds and things like that that they produce often can work on us in terms of benefits and give us different types of nutrients and medicinals. But we are distantly related to fungi and much more closely than we are to plants. So then we get on to some early human interaction. This is a skull, sorry, a jaw piece from a woman's body that was found in Spain, and it was dated to about 19,000 years. And in the teeth of this jawbone were found pieces of fungi. It's hard to know if she was eating them for medicinal or psychoactive qualities or for just edible qualities. But she was named the Red Lady because she was found in a chamber, deep in a chamber, and was covered in ochre pigment, and it turned her whole carcass or body red. Pretty interesting, amazing, very early fungal interactions with humans. Then we go a bit further on. Painting was found in Algeria. It's hard to really know exactly when this was made. It's dated to between 11,000 and 8,000 years old. Obviously, that's a pretty big range, but it depicts what they think may have been a shaman or some type of medicine person in this bee type of outfit, and covered all by these fungi, these mushrooms that are popping right out. And they believe that these shamans may have been the keepers of the fungi and the keeper of these medicinal qualities. And actually, there are connections between fungi and bees that a lot of scientists are now finding and discovering. And who knows, maybe there's the possibility that these early humans understood that connection. So we go a little bit further. In the Swiss Alps, I believe it was in 1991, this body was found by hikers. He was later dubbed Otzi the Ice Man. When the hikers found it, or this body, they thought it was a hiker that had died and been covered in the ice. So they called search and rescue. And when search and rescue came in, they were like, whoa, these tattoos look very, very old. They're all tribal. I mean, it's possible that humans these days had tribal tattoos because a lot of people get those, but they started to think that maybe this was a lot older than they realized. And they did some different tests. They've done a lot of different studies on his body, and they found that he was likely about 5,000 years old. Some of the things that were found on his body were this belt, and this belt contained pieces of two different fungi. One of them, you can find both of them in this area. One is the tinderconch, and this is the tinderconch here. And then the other one is the birch polypore. And they both actually can be found on the same tree sometimes. And I've actually found that recently, both on the same tree. And they believe that he was using the birch polypore for intestinal parasites, possibly, as well as antiseptic qualities. The birch polypore is known for all different types of antiseptic qualities, but it's found to be really good for wounds and healing, especially as scars heal. It can help scars to almost disappear, they say. He then was likely using the tinderconch, the other one that I showed, to carry an ember from one day to the next. The tinderconch is really amazing in that you can put a small ember into, you can burrow a small hole or put it on the surface of this mushroom and blow on it until it embers into the mushroom. And then you can put that specimen into a pouch or cover it with some moss and carry it for that whole day. And then that evening you can then flick some of it out and start a new fire. They also think he may have been using it for therapeutic reasons. He actually had dots all over his body, and a lot of them corresponded to the meridians that you can find acupuncturists using these days. And they think that maybe he was heating those specific spots because there's evidence that he was suffering from all different types of ailments and diseases. Then we can also see a lot of connection. The Maya have this deep connection with fungi. They call these mushroom stones, and they're found all over throughout the Mayan culture, and they date back 5,000 years or longer. And so it's clear that they had this deep connection with fungi. possibly through its psychoactive qualities or entheogenic qualities, possibly through edibility or medicinal properties, but it's very clear that they had this very deep connection with fungi. Then we also see in ancient Greece, this is a depiction of Demeter and Persephone offering each other these mushrooms. So there's a lot of history of humans using mushrooms. In the US, we've been taught to be afraid of mushrooms, this mycophobic mentality that we've kind of grown up with because of this possibility of poison mushrooms. Poisonous mushrooms are definitely something that you can find in the wild, and you always have to be 100% sure of what you're eating when you eat it. But that said, there are also poisonous plants that you can find in the wild that can poison you. So you always have to be careful with anything that you're harvesting. Here's a depiction of some medicine women from Siberia. The Amanita muscaria, which is the red mushroom with these white dots that you see in a lot of different folklore and things like that, was used extensively, especially in northern Siberia. And it was consumed by the people. And often these shaman or medicine women would be the keepers of these specific mushrooms, and sometimes they would feed them to different animals like reindeer. For instance, the reindeer would consume this mushroom, and then they would pee out some of these psychoactive qualities, and leaving behind or taking in some of these more toxic things, and pulling them out of this this liquid that they then would pee out, and people would actually consume it and use it for its mind-altering and amazing effects. So again, you can see it in folklore, Alice in Wonderland, and a lot of other old images from different folklore books depict this specific mushroom. Okay, but what are fungi? Fungi are mycelium. So the main part of the fungus is this filamentous stage that you can see in the picture here. They call it mycelium, and mycelium forms these mats, very dense mats, and it can branch out extremely quickly, much more quickly than roots of plants, and it can utilize nutrients. It can break down different types of wood and different types of plant material, releasing those nutrients so that different plants can then soak those or absorb those nutrients back up. They also are known to transport nutrients between different plants, and we can talk about that a little bit more. But the main part of the fungus is mycelium. You can think of it almost as like a fruit tree, and then that mushroom that you see is actually the apple of a fruit tree. Most of the time you don't see mycelium. It's either in the wood or underground. Fungi are very elusive. You know, we see them only when they emerge as mushrooms and things like that. And so that's another kind of one of the reasons that people are also afraid of mushrooms, or a lot of people are afraid because they don't really know. You know, you're afraid of what you don't understand. So here's some more photos of mycelium that I took. Some little fans growing off of the leaf litter and utilizing that moisture in the air, fanning out so that they can pull it right out of the air. Okay, so how do they eat? Fungi, the mycelium releases extracellular enzymes. So extracellular enzymes are these different compounds that they release out of their cells into whatever they're growing through, either in wood or soil or other organisms and things like that. But they release these enzymes that break down that material, and then they're sucking all that sugars, in the case of decomposers, back into their structure and slowly growing through and swimming through as they break down that material. So I'm going to just talk briefly about some of the different groups of fungi. Often I separate fungi into their different functions, things that they feed off of. So one of these groups is decomposers. Decomposers are feeding off of dead material. Sometimes they're feeding off of cellulose or lignin. Sometimes they're feeding off of other compounds and materials. When they're feeding off of cellulose, you'll often see what they call brown rot. And brown rot or cubic rot is that brown decomposed log that you might see in the woods. This fungus is breaking, or these fungi are breaking down the cellulose, leaving this lignin behind, and that's that brownish color that you get, and that often cleaves off in cubes. And then often you will see as well what they call white rot, which is when the lignin is broken down and it's left behind, and it kind of pulls apart in these kind of more stringy pieces. And you can find both of those pretty easily in the woods just by looking at some decomposing logs. But they may be opportunistic, so they're not only growing on things that are dead. They might be growing on something that seems alive, but is starting to have some dead tissue, and they come in as an opportunist and feed off of that dead tissue as that organism is starting to die. So here are a couple examples of things that I've found in the woods, some beautiful decomposers and some mycelium. They are in so many different shapes, so many different sizes. Sometimes you don't see them at all. Sometimes you see them abundantly. And they all kind of fall along this kind of continuum. So then you have parasites. Parasitic fungi are living off of, just like any parasite, off of living tissue. Sometimes they can be on living trees or living plants. Sometimes they're on insects. Sometimes they're on humans. They don't always kill the host. Sometimes they will live on the host for many, many, many years. Some fungi will live for decades without even showing themselves. For instance, chaga mushroom, we'll talk about that maybe in a little bit, can appear and be on or inside of that wood of the birch tree for decades before it even shows that it's there. And if you think about it, it doesn't make sense for the parasite to kill its host, because then it has no food and no source of food, and it has to find a new host. So it makes sense for a parasite to stick around, not kill its host, and just slowly sap off of it. So here's some examples. This one is called honey mushrooms. So there's a species of honey mushroom that's found all over the states, but specifically in Oregon, there's this really massive below ground colony of these honey mushrooms. They're known to be parasitic and decomposers, so they kind of bridge the gap between both, but they are parasitic on roots of trees, and they form and connect the different roots and feed off of that carbon that the plants are photosynthesizing. And this specific one, they believe, is the largest in terms of mass of any organism. All the same DNA underground between all the different roots of the trees and plants. Here's a not so pretty photo. We'll go past that one. So that's an example of a parasite on humans. Something like athlete's foot is a fungus. There are a couple different ones that will attack our skin, but that's a really good example. And here we find what may be seen by a lot of people on National Geographic or BBC. If you look, some of the BBC Life or Planet Earth episodes have some specials on this specific fungus. This is in the grouping called cordyceps. Cordyceps are parasitic on insects, and specifically this species is parasitic on ants, as you can see. And they actually, a spore will land on the ant, and it will enter into the body without killing the ant, and it will live inside of this ant. And actually, over time, ants have developed these ways to actually sense that it's there. So if ant comes back to a colony and is infected, the guards at the entrance to the colony can actually sense that, and they will bring that that insect or that ant that is infected off into the woods, and they'll kill that ant, and then they'll also kill themselves so they don't bring this fungus into the colony and cause the colony to collapse. It's pretty amazing. Not only does this ant get infected by this fungus, but the fungus will travel throughout the body and grab hold of this muscular system. A lot of people used to think that it was the brain of the insect that was colonized and controlled, but it's actually, they're finding that the fungus grabs onto the muscular system and is actually able to move this insect like a marionette almost, and position it in a perfect position to disperse its spores as far as possible, or drop them down onto a colony below. They've actually they've actually seen ants crawling back and forth on a twig, and they couldn't really figure it out. And then the next day they found it within a mushroom or a fruiting body of cordyceps coming out of the back of its head right above a colony. And they figured that, wow, it looks like this fungus was positioning this ant perfectly to spore bomb this colony right below where this ant was. Pretty amazing. So then we have the next grouping that we call mycorrhizal. Mycorrhizal fungi, instead of being decomposers and sapping sugars out of the decomposing wood or decomposing material, or being parasitic and feeding off of living things and getting sugars from living things, mycorrhizal fungi have developed these relationships with the plant roots. And there are two main groupings within that. And they form this relationship and they transport they transport water, they transport nutrients, and in return, the plants are exchanging carbon sugars that they're photosynthesizing from the atmosphere. And they've actually been able to track sugars from one plant to another through fungi. And not only that, but plants that are being diseased or hit by some kind of insects or pests will actually control how much energy they're putting into the seedlings right near them versus the seedlings that are further away, and they can actually send more sugars to these seedlings that are further away, possibly increasing the likelihood of their survival. But like I said, there are two main groupings, ectomycorrhizal and arbuscular. And ecto meaning on the outside, they form these sheaths around the roots and protect them from different types of pathogens and disease, while also transferring sugar or transferring nutrients, transferring water. They're really amazing at utilizing water and transporting it and transporting nutrients as well. About 90% of land plants rely on fungi for this underground connection and for nutrients and water. And so if you think about it, one plant could be connected with 100 different species. They found hundreds of species on one tree, for instance. And then all those hundreds of species could be connected to all different other plants, creating this massive web. They've done studies and found that if you take a cubic inch of soil, you can have upwards of 5 miles of fungal cells if you back them up, touching each other, 5 miles long, just in a cubic inch of soil. So fungi are there, they're vast, they're all around us, and often we don't see them, so we don't really think about them that much. But here's an example of the ectomycorrhizae. When the fungi come in contact with the roots, they cause the root to create this special root tip that you can see in the background here. And then some examples of fungi that are ectomycorrhizal. For instance, these bolete types of mushrooms, which we'll talk about a little more. So amanita, you can see on the other side on the right there. Those are ectomycorrhizae. There are a lot of different mushrooms that are ectomycorrhizal. And then we have what we call arbuscular mycorrhizal. So arbuscular mycorrhizae actually form these amazing structures inside the cells of the roots. And they enter in, they find a perfect cell that is perfect for their means of transport and exchange. And they break that cell wall, because plants have a cell wall that protects them. And this cell membrane that also holds all their organelles in. And instead of breaking that membrane, the fungi divide into the cell, and then the plant membrane divides and divides, making room for this fungus and connecting at every surface so that it has the most efficient connection. And the amazing thing is that it creates these unique tree-like formations inside of the cells. So these are microscopic photos inside of the cells of plants and these fungal connections that you see. So arbuscular mycorrhizae are responsible for a compound called glomalin. Glomalin is almost like a glue type of structure. It holds soils together. It's antimicrobial. It can store nitrogen and slowly release it. It's in almost all soil, and it really helps those networks basically to function, and the plants to absorb different types of nutrients and stores it for them so that it's not all there at once or draining away and flowing away when there's large rainstorms and things like that. Then we have endophytes. So we had decomposers, we had parasitic fungi, we had mycorrhizal, and then this fourth group we call endophytes. So endo meaning inside, and phytes. Phytic is the group of plants. So anytime you see phyte, it often means plant. So endo, phyte, inside of plants, these fungi that are growing inside of these this tissue of the plant. And this wasn't known until recently, but does somebody have a question? This wasn't known until recently, but a lot of compounds that they're now that they've known about forever, different types of medicinal compounds, different types of flavor compounds, are actually produced by the fungi within the plant cells, and not actually the plant itself. Things like spearmint apparently is a big one. The flavor spearmint that comes, you would think, from the spearmint plant is actually from a fungus that lives inside of that plant. And so then the question is, are they actually two different organisms? Or are they one organism? You know, they are technically two organisms, but they are one entity and they always appear together. So it's really interesting relationship. But a lot of different plants have these relationships with fungi inside of their cells and have a lot of benefits from those different types of compounds. So when we think about these different categories, instead of being specific strict categories, as humans, we kind of like to group things into categories so that we can understand them a little bit more, but it's actually more of a continuum. Things like morels, like you can see in this photo, fall in between mycorrhizae and decomposers, whereas the honey mushrooms that we saw before fall kind of in between decomposer and parasitic, and they kind of utilize both things. Depending on the situation, depending on the tree or plant that they're connected with, or organism that they're connected with. So they're not strict groupings. There's this continuum of different functions that these fungi do. So now we're going to continue on. So a lot of people don't realize this, but the beautiful orchids that we see in the forest actually rely on fungi. Orchid seeds don't have enough storage within their casing to actually allow the plant to shoot up a shoot that is long enough to reach the surface and start photosynthesizing. It actually relies on this connection with fungi, almost like a mycorrhizal connection, to source these different types of sugars, the sugars that these fungi are getting from other plants that are photosynthesizing. And some orchids actually will never produce chlorophyll, meaning that green part of the plant that allows it to photosynthesize. And sometimes when they don't produce chlorophyll, they will rely on fungi their whole life for these sugars. And then sometimes they will start producing chlorophyll, green parts, and they will exchange and give some back to the fungi for helping it to kind of break out of that seed and grow to the surface. But all orchids that I know of have some kind of relationship that they rely on fungi for this initial boost to get up to the surface and start photosynthesizing and growing. Here's another common thing that you might find in the Northeast. This one's called Indian pipe. A lot of people find that in the woods around here. This is a pink version. Often you see it more of a white color. And Indian pipe doesn't produce chlorophyll. Like we just said, it's what we call an achlorophylous plant, meaning no chlorophyll. And it relies on fungi to get these different sugars to grow and reproduce. And it never actually produces any chlorophyll to give back to the fungus. It just kind of saps off of the fungus for its whole life. So more relationships. We're going to talk a lot about these relationships because fungi form all these different types of relationships with all these different organisms in the environment, helping them out, and these organisms help the fungi as well. But a lot of people see in nature videos these leafcutter ants, and they're just kind of starting to talk a little bit more about them in the nature videos. But in a lot of the ones that I saw growing up, they'd show these leafcutter ants and they'd be like, sweet, they're cutting the leaves and they're bringing them back to the colony, and then they would just cut off there. And you're like, okay, I guess the ants are able to feed on the leaves and that's their source of food. But a lot of people don't realize the ants don't produce enzymes that are able to break down these leaves, but the fungi do. So these ants have been forming these relationships, these specific leafcutter ants, and there's a bunch of different species within this grouping. They form a relationship with a fungus that they grow inside of their colony, this fungus garden. And it's thought that these fungal gardens are actually thousands and thousands of years old, possibly, because the queen in the colony actually has this special pouch inside of its mouth that it can carry this small amount of mycelium when a colony either collapses or it wants to form a new colony, maybe a new queen is born. It's able to carry this small amount of mycelium in its pouch and start a whole new colony. And so they think that these clones have been around for thousands of years. And so the fungi are fed these pieces of plant material. Sometimes they're living plants, sometimes they're dead plant material, depending on the species. And the fungi break those plant materials down, and the ants then slowly, sustainably are feeding off of this fungus. And actually they lay their larvae in them, and the larvae mature and start to feed off the fungus. And they do it in a sustainable way so that they can basically help this colony grow on for indefinitely, basically. And there are all these different organisms that are involved in this relationship. There's actually a fungus called Ascomycetes that will attack the fungus garden and can cause the colony to collapse because the fungus garden will be so attacked that it won't be able to survive. But then there's another organism that is a filamentous bacteria that grows on the backs of the ants that fights this Ascomycetes, this parasitic fungus. And so it can actually fight off this parasitic fungus and allow the fungal garden to survive and live on. Pretty amazing, all these different organisms in this crazy relationship. But here's a little picture of that. The fungal colony might look like inside of these ant mounds and ant holes. Okay, so some of you may have heard of ergot. Ergot is a parasite on cereal grains and often on rye or barley or wheat. It connects to where a seed would form, and it infiltrates and forms this large, what we call sclerotia. This sclerotia, this black piece that you can see in this photo, is basically a mass of fungi. It's this mycelial mass that comes together and forms this storage unit. And what happens is that storage unit then falls to the ground and typically overwinters. And then in the next spring, it will shoot up these little fruiting bodies and release its spores and go on to the next cereal, hopefully, and start all over again. But it's known to produce a lot of different compounds, some of them psychoactive, some of them extremely toxic. We've been eating cereal grains for quite some time as humans. We've been eating them, throughout history, pretty much written history, and we didn't really know for a long time what ergot was. But there was this affliction that a lot of people were being hit by way back in kind of like the Middle Ages. Around then was when it was really hitting hard, and it would cause hallucinations. It would cause this hot feeling in your limbs sometimes, or even what they called dry gangrene, which was kind of gross. It could actually cause limbs or fingers to fall off. It was crazy, totally crazy. And they didn't really know what it was, and it would be really bad in certain years when the fungi was really growing very well. And there was this whole order of monks that were actually they were studying and treating different people that were afflicted by this. They ended up calling this disease St. Anthony's fire, because St. Anthony's monks were the ones that kind of treated a lot of these people that were afflicted by this. But they didn't really know what it was. And actually, when I was in college, I did a study, a little research paper on ergot, and I found some different recipes from way back that said if you didn't have at least one of these black things in your rye bread, that it wasn't a good loaf and it wasn't going to be good. Meanwhile, people were poisoning themselves while they're eating these loaves of bread that they thought, were extremely good for them because they had this sclerotia in there. Fast forward, Albert Hofmann, who discovered LSD, actually used some compounds in ergot as some of the initial compounds to create LSD. So there are a lot of different compounds. Some of them, like I said, are psychoactive. Ergot was also used during pregnancy if there was the baby was in a difficult position, maybe upside down, and they actually had accounts of babies that were upside down. The mother would be administered a really small dose of ergot, and actually the baby could flip all the way around into like the more conducive position for giving birth, which was totally crazy and amazing. But found that in higher doses it could actually cause the baby to die. So it's a really interesting thing. You could look more into it. There are a lot of studies and papers and old writings about that. But ergot was really amazing. Is a really amazing fungus. So then we're gonna continue. This is very heady, I know. There's a lot to talk about, but we have two main groupings of fungi. So we talked about the different ways that they feed. These are the different ways that they reproduce. And so we have Basidiomycetes and Ascomycetes. And Basidiomycetes are typically, you can think about them as most of your mushroom-shaped things, different types of toadstools, also things like conchs or polypores, so things that have many pores, or things like boletes, which are a porcini is a good example of boletes, things that have like a spongy surface on the bottom. Those are all Basidiomycetes. And then Ascomycetes are more things like cup fungi, things that you see on the right here. And also things like morels and ergot, and a lot of different molds and things like that are also Ascomycetes. But it has to do with the structures that they form to produce and disperse their spores. So this is just a basic life cycle. I know it's a little bit intense, a little dense here, but this is a life cycle of Basidiomycetes. And with Basidio and Ascomycetes, they undergo sexual reproduction. A lot of people don't realize this, but mushrooms are the response, or they are the product of sexual reproduction. And so these two different spores will germinate, and they shoot out these little tubes, and its cell grows on the end, and it continues to grow and grow and grow. They call that hyphae when it's this individual tubes. And then two different spores of the same species have to have these little tubes come out and connect to each other. And when those two different spores connect to each other, they have different genetics. They each have their own, what they call mating type. And a mating type is almost like a sex. You can think of it in that way. They have different variations of different genes. And some fungi have many, many, many different possible mating types. Some of them have very few. For instance, white button mushrooms that you find in the grocery store have only 2 possible mating types. So there's only 2 possible combinations there. Whereas some have up to 27,000 is, I think, the highest number that they've discovered. But if you think about that, the more mating types that you have, the more possible combinations that you have, the higher ability to utilize the environment, basically, more adaptable to the environmental stresses and the things that they come in contact with. But as you see, these fungi form together. They share all of their nuclei. So the nuclei is the DNA forms inside of the cell. And so at that point, they have 2 nuclei inside of the cell. And then they can form a mushroom. And at that point, when they form a mushroom, you can ask me questions about this at the end if you want. I'm just going to do it briefly. They'll form a mushroom, and inside of the gills or the pores of that mushroom forms what they call a basidium. Many basidia, one basidium. And on that basidium, these small spines called sterigmatiform, and on those spines, the spores begin to form. And at that point, these 2 different genetics and these 2 different nuclei fuse together and form one. And that's how you get this variation, just like you do with any organism. When you have sexual recombination, you get variation, and that's how you form new, unique organisms. That's how we're all unique, because we have this recombination that happens in our germ cells when we form. So that's just basic Basidiomycetes. I know it is a little heady, but we can talk more about it if you like. This is that fungus I was talking about that has 27,000 different mating types. Schizophilum commune, and Schizophilum actually has been found, species of Schizophilum have been found all over the world. They have exposed this fungus to the vacuum of space and found that they can pull it back in and start growing immediately and actually start producing fruiting bodies. They've also found specimens of it in the rock in the deep sea, and they've brought it up and put it onto a petri dish, which is like basically what you would grow out some fungi or different types of things on, and it started to grow and form fruiting bodies. And this rock was thousands and thousands and thousands of years old. Really amazing. Fungi are so adaptive. They can grow in all these different environments and utilize so many different compounds. But here are some common Basidiomycetes that you might see some different shapes. These are pictures that I took in the local area. You can see in the bottom left, we have some chanterelles. We have some different turkey tail lookalikes in the middle there. The one on the bottom right, we call beefsteak fungus. It actually bleeds almost like a piece of meat and has this really, really amazing deep color. But then we also have spiny fungi. These are called hedgehogs, or in that grouping. We have puffballs that you may see, things that look like coral. These are all Basidiomycetes, meaning that they form this club shape that the spores form on. Then we have Ascomycetes. So Ascomycetes form what we call an asci, which is a sac. Inside that sac, typically about 8 spores will form, and they build up pressure until they can break loose. They fling all those spores out all at once. And again, we're talking things like morels in the top left there, or cup fungi, or all different types of molds and things like that. A lot of Ascomycetes also do asexual reproduction, where they combine and create a genetic copy. It doesn't have any new variation. It's not a unique organism, but it creates a clone of itself that it can then pass on. And here are some examples of Ascomycetes. So we have like some dead man's fingers in the bottom left corner, they call that one. We have some cordyceps species to the right of that. You can see in the top left, there's a green staining fungus that you might find in the forest. That's really common in this area. And then just to the right of that one is actually the fruiting body of that fungus. You don't really see that often, this cup fungus that's green there. And then what we call lobster mushrooms to the right of that. That's actually a Basidiomycete fungus or mushroom that's colonized by this mold that causes it to change quality. It becomes an amazing edible mushroom, a culinary edible that's prized by a lot of chefs and foodies. And it's actually one of the most amazing textures that I've ever had. And then in the top right is a false morel, Gyrometra, that's also a Ascomycete. All those sacs form on the surface, and then they release their spores. So spores can be dispersed in many, many different ways. I actually showed a video, not everybody was on it yet, but I showed a video in the beginning of stinkhorn fungus. Stinkhorn actually form these different shapes that have this slimy, stinky substance, usually on their tips or inside, and it attracts different types of insects that land on it. And they maybe feed on a little bit of the fungus, but they also pick up that slimy spore substance, and then they disperse it when they land somewhere else and drop it on some other substance that hopefully that stinkhorn can continue to grow. We also have things like puffballs, as you see in this photo, that release puffs of spores when they get hit with rain, or maybe the wind blows in a certain way, or something steps on them. There are many, many different ways. Some fungi actually turn into this whole thing turns into a slimy substance, seeps down to the ground, and is dispersed by water. So they're dispersed in so many different ways. This is a good example of that one. The one on the left is the same fungus as the one on the right. They call that deliquescing when it turns into this slimy substance, and those are the spores in that black liquid that will then drip down the stalk and be dispersed by the rain. But if you find it on the left, when it's this beautiful white color, it's actually an edible mushroom. Again, we don't want to eat anything unless we're 100% sure of it, but it can be really great, especially if you eat it right away. But if you put it in your fridge overnight, you can come to it the next morning and it'll be a pile of slime. Not so good. But there are many other different groups. We can talk about them forever. but we're going to kind of stay finite. Our time is finite. So we're going to talk about just a kind of small grouping. But if anybody wants to get out in the woods sometime or give me a call and want to talk about fungi, I'm always happy to geek out on something. And I'll answer questions at the end. I don't see the text, the question bar, but I'll pull it up at the end there. So here's another grouping. This group is called slime molds, and slime molds are actually, they were once in the kingdom fungi, but they've been separated because they have a stage where they move around. They've been clocked at the fastest speed of any single-celled organism. The amazing thing is, though, that these spores, when they land on something, if it's a really liquidous area, they will form this fillet tail, like you might see in single-celled organisms, to travel through the liquid, or they'll stay as an amoeba kind of thing, and they travel around and absorb things through phagocytosis. This is the way they feed. They kind of envelop things and decompose them. And then they might release different signals when they get into an area where they're super dense, there's a lot of them, or there's not enough food for all of them, and they all cluster together. And instead of staying as individual cells, they actually form into one massive cell. The life of any single cell organism, all of their genetic material and their nuclei float around inside, and they'll continue to move around. And actually, the movie that was made in the 50s called The Blob was, some of you might know that. My connection is unstable. Oh no. The Blob was inspired by specific slime mold that people were seeing in their backyards. I think it was in Brooklyn, and in one part of the day it would be in one side of the yard, and then they'd look out in the afternoon and it was like moved to the other side of the yard, and people were freaking out that it was this alien organism that was going to envelop them. But then we also have other types of relationships. So again, fungi are in so many different relationships with so many different types of organisms. But you may see different types of lichens on trees and rocks, and you might wonder what they are. Lichens are actually a relationship between fungi and algae forming together in one entity. The algae photosynthesize and produce sugars for the fungus. The fungus is often protecting it and pulling in moisture and things to help the algae to grow. Sometimes there's even a bacteria, a third organism in there, all in one entity. And also the fungi are often able to break down different types of rock and nutrients to help the algae to grow. But really amazing, they form in all different ways, all different structures, sometimes on the ground, on rock, on trees, like I was saying. But now we're going to get into some other things. We're going to talk about some medicinals. Fungi have been found to be really, really amazing in terms of producing medicinal compounds. They produce all different types of polysaccharides. So polysaccharides are just these groups of sugars that are in different configurations, specifically what we call beta-glucans. And beta-glucans are produced by all different types of organisms, but fungi produce some very unique ones, and they're found to stimulate the immune system in certain ways, depending on the configuration of this polysaccharide. And like I said, all different fungi produce different polysaccharides, and a lot of them have been found to do some pretty amazing things medicinally, in terms of just helping the body adapt to daily life and its stresses, as well as all these other different things. That's my phone going off. But they can also be a really good source of vitamins, magnesium, potassium, zinc. Fungi are amazing, and so you might as well utilize them. People are taking them, like I said, medicinally, as well as eating them. But also there's a lot of history in extracting different types of medicines, because fungi, like we said in the beginning, are very similar to humans in terms of their cell structures, in terms of their relationship evolutionarily. So a lot of the compounds produced by fungi are really responsive in our bodies. So our bodies really respond to a lot of these different compounds. So for example, we have different types of organisms types of fungi that produce different compounds. We have cordyceps on the top left, agaricon to the right there, reishi, and then turkey tail. Those are all really amazing medicinals that you can consume. People consume them in tea. They consume them as a extract. They're really amazing compounds. I use them every day. I really find they help me. But But again, like I said, there have been a lot of different things extracted. So in 1928, Alexander Fleming accidentally discovered penicillin. So penicillin is a antimicrobial compound or antibacterial compound that is produced by fungus called penicillium. And Alexander Fleming went on vacation. He was a Scottish scientist, went on vacation one day, and he came back to his lab and he found that he was studying Staphylococcus. And so staph, things that cause staph infections, and there's some really intense bacteria that can harm people. And he was having trouble with these different Staphylococcus, having them grow and stuff like that. And then they were growing in high abundance when he was working on them. But he came back to his lab after a weekend and he found that there were fungal contaminants, basically spores that had gotten into his petri dishes somehow. And not only that, but they were fighting off the staph. And so he was like, whoa, these staph are basically backing off as this fungi, these spores, these molds. And penicillium is actually a pretty common bread mold. These molds are basically producing these antimicrobial compounds that are fighting off staph. And so he was able to isolate that, and it saved a lot of people, especially during World War II. They were able to produce in pretty high abundance and used for people, because in those times, when you got a serious wound, it would often lead to limbs being taken off. And that was like almost inevitable in a lot of cases. When you'd get a serious wound, you'd get gangrene or some kind of infection. But with the invention or discovery of penicillin, a lot of people were saved, and a lot of limbs and body parts were saved just because Alexander Fleming discovered this accidentally. He then went on to, he received 30 honorary degrees and a Nobel Peace Prize in physiology and medicine. There are also two other main compounds, a lot of different compounds that have been extracted from fungi, but two other ones I really want to highlight really quickly. One of them is lovastatin, and that's a cholesterol drug that's been used very extensively for people with high cholesterol. And then also cyclosporin, and cyclosporin is an immune depressing drug, and it's used during organ transplant, and it helps the body basically to not reject new organs. And it's been a game changer in the world of organ transplant, and really helped and saved a lot of people's lives. Cyclosporin was extracted from a species of fungi called Talipocladium. So pretty amazing stuff there, Alexander Fleming. Then fungi can do so many more things. They can remediate these environments that we live in. They can remediate natural environments. They can really remediate different chemical, industrial sites and things like that. They can also absorb different types of radiation and things like that. Fungi are amazing. They work in so many different ways. But as you can see here, they can actually feed off of different types of bacteria and things like that. So people create different filters and things to filter out harmful bacteria. They can also break down different hydrocarbon bonds. They've used them to break down crude oil, because they can break down those bonds that hold the hydrocarbons together and release and actually feed off of the crude oil. But again, they can also be used industrially on brownfields and things like that to remediate the environment and actually make it inhabitable to organisms again. Some pretty amazing studies there. You can definitely look some of that up. But also mycomaterials. So we call these mycomaterials because fungi, again, myco, materials made out of fungi and mycelium. There's a company called Ecovative that has created some really amazing things. On the right, you can see a surfboard that they created, but they also do all different types of materials. Now they're creating like textiles almost. They have a makeup applicator that they created that's like even softer than what you can find in a store, and it's all created using mycelium and having it grow in different ways. But fungi appear in so many different ways. Like we said, some of them are beautiful, some of them are deadly, and some of them are crazy and weird, and you have no idea what's going on there, but it's cool Anyway, here are some examples. This one on the left here we call the Barbie pagoda fungus, and that's actually all that color there is actually a real photo. It's not photoshopped or anything like that. I believe it's related to oyster mushrooms. Then we have fungi that phosphoresce, so fungi that glow in the dark. They produce phosphorus compounds that allow them to grow, and then likely these glowing fungi then attract different insects and things that will disperse their spores, things that are traveling around at night, like moths and things like that. Some examples of those. There are a lot of different species of phosphorescent fungi that grow all over the world. There are a few in this area that you can find at night sometimes. But here are some edibles, some local edibles that I've found. We have black trumpets on the right, some chanterelle, lobster mushroom, like I had said before. This is a really great one with the spines here. That's the hedgehog fungus. We also have another type of chanterelle in the bottom left corner there. But there are a lot of different edible mushrooms out there. Again, we have to be sure of what we're eating. If you're not 100% sure, always reach out to somebody else and somebody that knows. It's good to get 3 recommendations, 3 different people putting their eyes on it and trying to identify. And if you're still not 100% sure, don't eat it. It's not worth it. But again, there are so many great edibles out there, and they're amazing. I actually was very averse to eating mushrooms growing up, and the texture I just really couldn't do. I had trouble with, but I started discovering some of these amazing wild edibles that have all different textures. Some of them taste like chicken, for instance. Chicken of the woods or hen of the woods are 2 different species that both form these long, stringy structures, these mycelial strands that are very similar in size and texture to the meat of birds and things like that. So then we have some poisonous mushrooms. And so this one is called Destroying Angel. This is one of the most poisonous mushrooms that we have in the US. It creates a compound called amatoxin. Amatoxins are extremely strong toxic compounds that will be absorbed by your liver if you consume it, and it can destroy your liver and actually eventually cause death, or if you get a liver transplant, you can survive depending. But they're really strong compounds. They can kill you in a couple days. Typically there's a latent period, they call it, where you initially you get sick, but then you have this period where for about 24 hours you feel a little bit better, like you might be okay. And then after that 24 hours, often you can have your system starts to shut down, your organs start to break down, and you can die. So you have to be very, very sure of what you're eating. Again, you can, study these poisonous mushrooms and study the poisonous mushrooms in your area so you know what you're looking at when you find things. A lot of people stay away from this grouping we call Amanita, which is this specific species is in. Amanitas have these bulge, or what they call a vulva, at the bottom of the stem that you can see at the bottom here. And then you can't really see in this photo, but what they call an annulus, or a ring that goes around the stalk that protects the gills before they form, and then it remains as this ring. So those are some characteristics of Amanita. Within Amanita are some of the most deadly mushrooms, but there are a couple other common poisonous mushrooms in the Northeast. This one is also in the Amanita grouping. They call it death cap. It's very similar, produces a similar compound to the destroying angel. Produces compounds that produce ones that are volatile when you heat up. So people will cook this mushroom, and then these compounds will go volatile, and they can actually eat the mushroom afterwards. It's not something I recommend necessarily, but if you are the chef, you don't want to hang over top of it, because they say that those volatile compounds can actually be inhaled and make you sick, which is really interesting. And then we have some really crazy, weird I found this past year. They call it in aspic, meaning like in this gelatinous weird formation. So they make these weird gelatinous formations, and when they mature, they are almost like a puffball. They will puff out of that center core, basically. And then like we talked before, and Dom mentioned, one of my friends that's on this call mentioned earlier, what we call dog stinkhorn. So this is a type of stinkhorn like we were talking about. You can see this head that it forms at the top with all this slimy spore substance, and it smells really strong, and it attracts different insects that land on it and then fly away and bring the spores to new locations where this stinkhorn can hopefully start all over again and form more fruiting bodies. And then another really cool, crazy mushroom. This is species in the grouping that makes these spines in the hedgehog group. This is a really interesting, they call it like the bleeding hedgehog or bleeding fungus. It makes this almost blood-like liquid that can then like drip off of the outside of the fungus. Really interesting, totally wild and crazy. But that's the end of my presentation. I have here just a couple, if anybody wants to take a photo or look at these are just some resources that I would recommend if you're looking to learn more about fungi, learn more about cultivation. Trad Cotter is really amazing. He's down, I think in North Carolina. Mushroom Mountain is his business. He does a lot in education. He's doing really, really amazing things in terms of medicine. He created a system where he can inject a specific strain of a bacteria or some type of thing that is afflicting someone, and that fungus inside of this pouch will produce a unique antimicrobial or antibiotic that he can then take and administer to this person that's suffering, and it would be a unique and specific antimicrobial compound for that specific strain that they're afflicted by. But again, really great resources. William Padilla Brown is doing some amazing stuff. Young mycologist, he's just mind-blowing the things that he's doing. I would definitely recommend checking him out on Instagram, looking him up. Jay Schindler is doing some amazing stuff. Olga Tsoga. John Mycologist is a local guy. He does some really great mushroom walks, and he creates different types of mushroom extracts that you can purchase. I would definitely recommend him. And Ryan Paul Gates is really amazing as well, doing cordyceps breeding, and he specializes in different types of reishi mushroom. I've been finding a lot of reishi, really amazing medicinal, has been used all over the world. But now I'm going to get back and I'm going to answer some questions if people are interested. Here, let's get back. I'm going to stop sharing. Okay, let's see here. So, the first question I see is, are there underwater fungi? Good question. So, there are definitely underwater fungi. There are a lot of species of underwater fungi, and you can actually, I still haven't done this, I've been meaning to do this, but you can go into your local stream and you can pick out leaf litter that is inside of the stream underwater. And from what I've heard, I haven't done this, you can bring it back to your house and put it into a glass of water, and sometimes you can even see fruiting fungi, little tiny fruiting bodies starting to form on the surface of those leaves. Some underwater fungi actually use the foam in streams. So sometimes if you see in like mountainous streams, I see it a lot in the Adirondacks, these like mounds of foam that are floating down the stream.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of different types of underwater fungi actually disperse their spores. And some of them produce these unique spore shapes to do that. And one of them produces what they call a tetrahedron shaped spore. So if you can think of a tetrahedron, it has these four kind of projections. Instead of being round, it's these different projections, and they think that it can actually take a droplet of, or a like basically a droplet of air, or like a bubble of air, and it can get that bubble of air underneath so that it can be more lofty and float further down the stream. But they say you can actually culture them. If you collect some foam from a stream, you can culture those fungi. Okay. And I saw probably underwater fungi. Does mycorrhizae attach exclusively to tree or plant root, or all plant roots? So mycorrhizae, they attach to almost all plant roots. like I said, about 90% of plants. So all these different herbaceous plants, all these different big trees. One grouping that is known to not create fungal mycorrhizal connections is brassicas. So all those things in the brassica family, like broccoli and Brussels sprouts and all those different things actually are known not to create mycorrhizal connections. But almost everything else does, and they actually a lot of these plants rely on these fungi to get these nutrients and this moisture. Oh yeah, somebody answered that question. Thanks, Bree. Let's see. Yeah, Cytherea, that's pretty awesome. Where is your morel patch? It's a good question. I don't release any of my patches, but actually I haven't had too much amazing luck finding morels in these past couple of years. You know, some years are better than others. It all depends on the moisture and the temperature levels that time of year. But I haven't really found too many really amazing abundant patches. I've heard though on the other side of the river, from where I am, New Paltz, Rosendale, Kingston area. So just on the other side of the river, Rhinebeck, that area I've heard can be really good. They connect with certain trees. So often with elms that are starting to die, or apple trees, ash, sycamore. There are a lot of different trees that they form connections with, but you often want to look for those trees, and they often come up when the trees are starting to die because they start kind of mycorrhizally forming these connections and transporting things to and from the roots. And then as the tree starts to die, they need to find a new place to live so they can actually start to produce and start to feed off of that dead tissue as the tree is starting to die. And that's when they start to fruit, and you'll start seeing them in more abundance. And then as the tree dies and becomes completely dead, a lot of times you'll see that diminish and you won't see as many. So I don't really have too many good morel patches, I have to say. But when I find them, maybe I'll take you there. Are there any other questions at all? I would love to answer anything. Definitely reach out to me if you have any questions. I'd be happy to receive emails, or you can message me through Instagram. I'm working on a website right now, so hopefully I'll have that up soon. I do some walks here and there. I'll do private walks if you ever want to go out on your land. I also do consultations if you want to learn about what's on your land, as well as grow on your land. I do some consultation on cultivation in the outdoor environment as well as indoors. So reach out to me for that if you're curious or just want to learn about doing and what you can do in your house. There's so much out there, and I'd love to share it with you. Did you have anything else, Madeline?
No, just thank you. Thank you.
I'm sure I didn't cover even close to as much as this is out there, but.
No, this is great. And we really do want to be able to sponsor you for like an open walk once we get the go ahead to meet outside in groups of larger than 25 or whatever the limit is currently.
Yeah, that sounds great. I would love that.
If anybody here doesn't have my email, you can reach out to us through the ECC's Facebook page, or you can email ecc@townofrochester.ny.gov. And we'll keep you on the list. And once we can get that set up, we'll make sure that we have Luke back as soon as possible.
Yeah, that
and
sounds
I
great.
did record this, so Luke, is it all right if I share it with people who couldn't attend? I had 2 people reach out and ask me if I would post it somewhere for them.
Of course. That sounds great. Just showing some fungi I've been finding recently. This is some reishi that I've been finding. This is the hemlock reishi, super common right now. It's growing in amazing abundance. I'm sure you're finding that a lot. And then this amazing artist conch. So this fungus actually formed like this on the tree, and then the tree fell over, and so it had to produce new spore producing surfaces like this. So you can see perpendicular to the original one. I found this one in the Adirondacks. I think, Dom, were you with me when I found this, I think? Thought so. Amazing specimen. I felt bad picking it, but I just love to show it to people. So cool. And
Awesome.
also some other good resources. If you're looking to learn some more about fungi, like I said, John Nicolati, Catskill Fungi. Mushroom Shed is an amazing source for especially cultivation and learning what you can learn about cultivation and doing things in your own house. That's in New Paltz. You can look us
Cool.
up on Facebook as well as on Instagram. And then also the Mid-Hudson Mycological Association is a great resource as well. That's a local mycology club.
Excellent. And hey, next, I forgot to say that next month our speaker is going to be talking about beekeeping and bees.
That sounds
Nice.
awesome. So they've actually found some fungi now that have always done this, obviously, but they're discovering that they produce compounds that the bees might be utilizing and maybe feeding off of these antimicrobial compounds. Paul Stamets has done a lot of work recently with that and found that it can increase the immune response for a lot of these bees and help them fight off different things, different parasites, as well as like the varroa mite, and just enabling them to be more energetic. So they're doing a lot of studies now with bees and using microbial extracts from fungi. And that's why they think maybe bees did a lot of nesting and forming hives inside of trees, that they're actually not just searching for this home, but they're actually feeding off the metabolites that the fungi are releasing and becoming, boosting their immune systems.
Cool.
It's crazy.
Thank you, Luke.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
That's great.
Oh,
Awesome.
dude,
Thank you so much.
Arian. No way. Good to see you all. I love you all so much.
I'm
for
unmuting
coming out and
everybody if you
watching.
all want to say thanks to Luke.
Great presentation, Luke. Really.
Yeah.
Seriously,
was
this was
awesome.
great.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you much.
It was a little jumbled. I didn't have anything. It was all kind of like as it comes from the mind,
Oh,
But I'm working on my presentation a little bit more, and I'll be adding more things into it.
cool.
Really, really interesting. Thanks a lot.
Again.
Oh, thank you. Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Enjoy your evening, everybody.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, Luke.
Nice.